Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garetano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch.
I've got a message for you, and you're not going to like it.
Look at his chest.
Ready for death.
That was from the 1987 motion picture Prince of Darkness by the mighty John Carpenter. The movie is based on a scientific concept that proposes both good and evil exist on a subatomic level, a quantum theory that might eventually explain the reasoning for our nature in opposition, both natural and supernatural.
Suppose there is a universal mind controlling everything, a God willing the behavior of every subatomic particle. Now, every particle has an antiparticle, its mirror image, its negative side. Maybe this universal mind resides in the mirror image instead of in our universe as we wanted to believe.
Tonight's guest claims to have experienced the dark side in the form of monsters, apparitions, and demonic entities that for most of us would only be found in fiction and on the horror movie screen. We'll hear his story after this commercial break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
You are listening to the Off to the Witch podcast, where we explore that bizarre borderline between fiction and reality and all subjects arcane. Journey over to my YouTube channel and subscribe now at youtube.com/@offtothewitch for a variety of extras and special features, including the Off to the Witch mini docs with further insights on many of the latest episodes, as well as previews and behind the scenes of my forthcoming investigative series, Off to the Witch Presents, as well as the anniversary edition of my motion picture documentary, Montauk Chronicles. And follow us on social media. All links are available at linktree.com/Garetano7, Garetano7. And stay tuned for more Off to the Witch.
There is a life form growing out of prebiotic fluid. It is not winding down into disorder. It is self-organizing into the shape of fear. The most evil force man has ever known is awakening. Master of terror and suspense, John Carpenter brings you Prince of Darkness. Prince of Darkness. Don't see it alone.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garetano, and tonight's guest, Dex Skarsvog, lives in a world where monsters, similar to those in our favorite scary movies, are very real. Perhaps a psychic perception allows him to see from beyond. He's not alone, as similar reports have been documented throughout human history. So, here's my interview with Dex Skarsvog.
I was born in Casper, Wyoming in 1980. To a single mom. By the time I was 2, we moved out to Washington State out on the West Coast, where my sister was born. Pretty average childhood at that point. Eventually, Mom got married again, and we had our stepdad around for a while. One of my first memories of anything paranormal was in a blue house we lived in when I was 5 or 6. I'm not sure how old I was, but I was laying on my stomach on the floor in my bedroom playing with my cars. And I felt something grab my ankle. And it started pulling me toward the wall, and I couldn't scream or anything. I tried, and no sound would come out. My mom ends up walking into the room, and whatever had a hold of my ankle just let go. Never saw anything, nothing, but there was a handprint around my ankle. I was scared senseless to sleep in that room after that.
I don't blame you. At the time, and again, that's such an extra, and you know, there are other people that have been essentially assaulted by these things in the dark, whatever they are, right? And we'll get into what you think they are or what you perceive that they are. But at that time, and I always ask this question, and it doesn't mean, I want to preface it by saying I'm not suggesting anything you were watching, you know, sparked your imagination for this, but I'm always curious as to what reference point you may have had as a little kid. Because when I was a little kid, I had a head full of horror films, and I had a really strange experience when I was like 14. Did you watch any horror films at that age, or even classics, or anything that when that thing happened to you, it was almost as if a horror movie was coming to life?
No, I wasn't allowed to watch horror movies at that point. I'd heard a few campfire stories kind of things, but never watched any horror movies or anything like that before that. But I think that experience in particular is what fed my interest into the paranormal so much. Trying to find out exactly what it was and where it came from, kind of thing, you know?
And did you tell your mother, did you tell anybody that you knew right after what exactly happened?
I told my mom as soon as she walked in the room, and she just chalked it up to my imagination.
It makes you think how many times that has happened to a kid and the parents just say it was all your imagination. In fact, you know, I would press the kid for more questions, of course, because we're open to this thing. And I think a lot of people are these days, and maybe back then it was more like, you know, the kid's making it up. But you were clearly shaken. You must have been crying when that happened, no?
Yeah, I was very, very scared, and I wouldn't lay on the floor to play with my toys at all after that period. I'd sit on my bed if I was going to play with my toys.
And what did you give this thing a name back then? Like, what did you call whatever this was when that happened to you? Did it have a name, the boogeyman or something like that?
I just called it something that grabbed me.
Okay.
I didn't really give it a name, a specific name. It was just something that had happened, and I didn't know any label to put on it at the time or anything else.
And did you fear that this thing was going to come back, that let's say the next night or the night after that?
I was scared for a long time that it would drag me out of my bed and nobody would come in, and it would drag me off to wherever it wanted to take me.
So that happened, and it scared the hell out of you. When was the next time after that? What was the next thing that happened?
It wasn't even a couple of weeks later. I was out playing with my friends outside, the same house, obviously. And we all got this creepy feeling. We looked down to the end of the dirt road we lived on, and that was the first time that we saw the black-eyed children. That had to have been... It couldn't have been any later than 87.
So for the people that don't know what the black-eyed children are, can you describe to me that day, bring me to that day, what you were doing just before you saw them, and then describe the whole scenario to me?
We were playing some kind of catch. I don't remember if it was a football or a softball or what, but we were playing catch out in the middle of the dirt road. And all of us got this weird feeling all at the same time. We actually dropped the ball and started looking around to figure out what was going on. Felt like we were being watched or something. And down at the end of the dirt road, there was a little boy and a little girl. Looked like 1800 style clothing. And I decided to get a closer look and find out what was going on. Everybody else stayed back behind me, you know. And I walked up closer, and that's when I could see their eyes were all black. And as soon as I could see that, I wasn't going to get any closer. I didn't know what they were, but I knew solid black eyes were not normal. it scared me a little bit, but they never came toward the house or toward us or anything else, so it didn't really freak me out a whole lot.
Weeks previous, you were dragged from your bed. Now you're outside and you see these odd kids. At that time, did you think they were anything out of this world, or did you just think they may have been just strange kids?
At first, I thought they were strange kids till I got close enough and saw the black eyes, and then I wasn't sure what to think of it. I went to my mom and my stepdad, and neither one of them had anything to say about it. They're like, I don't know what to say, so...
And did your mom or your stepdad have any experience in that house at that time that they, you may have noticed them talking about behind, whispering in another room or talking about the situation?
There were whispers, but I don't know what they were talking about for sure. And they had a lot of hushed conversations around that time.
Yeah, because I'm curious, what a family is going through at the time, how they really deal with it. We've read about it. We've read about so many accounts, but you were living it.
Yeah, it was really scary to be in there. Just thinking about that thing grabbing my ankle, it still kind of makes my skin crawl sometimes.
And then you're outside and you see these kids. Now, you weren't the only one that saw them. There were other kids.
There were 6 or 7 of us kids out there that saw them. I was the only one that got close enough to see their eyes.
So you walk up to these kids. They have dark black, scleral covered eyes. And it's not a joke. It's not a Halloween prank. In the 80s, I don't even think those things were available for that stuff.
I don't think they were outside of like major movie productions.
Right. That's for sure. And so you can completely rule that out. There wasn't any movies being shot in the area. And the black-eyed children weren't really spoken about back then. It's something that kind of surfaced later. So you see these kids, your friends see these kids, or whatever they are. And then what happens?
I think we ended up having to go inside because it was like dinner time or something. And then when we got back outside, they were gone. And I don't think we ever saw them again in that house.
Okay. So just for the audience that doesn't really know much about the folklore regarding black-eyed children, can you give me a little background before we go forward?
Well, I know you're not supposed to invite them into your space, whether it's your car or your tent or your house or anything else, because legend has it that in some form or another that disaster will befall you, whether it's they kill you or you take on a bad luck streak or whatever. There's several different things that are said about them as to what the effect is, but ultimately it boils down to don't invite them in.
And so is it that they just, there have been many accounts of this, maybe around the world, they just show up at people's houses? Can you kind of give me the scenario?
From what I understand, I've seen them show up at the door a few times, but that's much, much later on. But they'll knock at the door and often ask to use the phone or come inside for whatever reason. And inviting them in is much the same as inviting a known dark spirit into your home. It's not a good idea, and it will cause untold problems.
And I'm assuming this phenomena catches people off guard. It says I see children, and even people that don't believe in anything supernatural have been encountered by these things. There are accounts around the world, but I think it started in Texas?
I think so. I think it started in the late 90s in Texas was when the documentation started.
Okay, but obviously it was occurring before then.
Yeah.
All right, before we even get into what you think this is, or what you can assume this is, or what you know it is, what happened after that in life? What was your next encounter?
It wasn't too much after that. My stepdad built us a fort, and me and the neighborhood kids got together and formed a group that we called the Kidville Detectives. Originally, my mom was making up little cases for us to go solve and stuff. And one day, a police officer came to the house and told us about a car that had been going up and down the road at a specific time every day, same time every day. And they didn't really have the resources to look into it. And, well, we'd gotten kind of a little reputation for solving stuff. So we went up there and specifically watched for the car to come by. And the first time we saw it, we noticed that there wasn't anybody in the driver's seat. And it specifically disappeared at a particular spot along the highway. We ended up going and checking out along both sides of the highway where it disappeared at, and ended up finding a car in the ditch that had been completely overgrown by grass and everything. There was skeletal remains in the driver's seat. After they pulled the car out and gave the remains a proper burial, the car wasn't seen again on that stretch of highway.
Wow. So you, in other words, you witnessed a ghost car? You witnessed an apparition, a vehicle? What do you think it was? Okay.
I'm 99% sure it was his ghost specifically seeking a proper burial to be able to rest in peace. And I feel like we helped him achieve that.
That's and a lot of kids were inspired to do that. There was literature, there were things that, everything from Scooby-Doo to the Hardy Boys. I know I was absorbing that stuff as a kid, to Goonies, and I wanted to do the same. And you had a group that your mother really supported, and you had an experience to take with you. I'm sure you told your friends about what happened in the room.
Oh, yeah. All of us told all of our friends at school about it, and most of the kids at school were like, no way, that's just a ghost story.
Well, I mean, there's obviously truth behind ghost stories, and but then there's other kids that doubt because they're echoing their parents or whatever. But then you're having these profound experiences. Did any of your other friends, because I know at that one time they saw the kids with the black eyes, did your friends have any experiences at home? Because I'm wondering, and I guess we'll get to it, if the area itself had any kind of charge to it, like some areas do around the world. Paranormal, activity happening.
I don't remember anybody mentioning any experiences at home, but they may not have told me about them. It's an interesting thought, though, because I did find out years later that the location that the house that I lived in was actually, they actually exhumed bodies to build the house.
And a lot of the times that's the case, it seems. In this case, though, now, and you were at that house until what age?
Oh, we left there when I was, I think, 8.
8, okay. So after you saw the car, was there anything else that happened in that area before you left?
There was always weird noises, and the dog that we had that actually came with the house was always looking off in corners, very alert at something, but none of us ever saw anything where he was looking.
When you say he came with the house, the owners just said, we also have a dog. You want it?
Pretty much, yeah.
What kind of dog was it?
The tenants had left him behind, and they had him chained up out on the back porch, and he only ever got scraps. He was badly abused.
Oh, boy.
And my mom's always had a major soft spot for dogs, so she couldn't just ignore it.
Of course. Yeah, a lot of us do.
So I have a soft spot for cats, personally.
Cats are great. I love all animals. So the dog was seeing things too, no?
Yeah. I honestly and firmly believe that the dog was seeing something that was there that was outside of the range of human perception.
And you had that same ability too, but your friends noticed the kids now. So you leave the house when you're 8. And your ability to perceive these things came with you. It wasn't just because of the house, correct?
Definitely not.
Okay.
It was a few years, I think, before I experienced anything else after we left the house, but I've always been sensitive to it.
And what was the next thing that you experienced, and where did you move to?
Let's see. We moved to Buckley or Bonnie Lake. I can't remember for sure. That it was like two towns that were right next to each other. There were weird noises a lot at night in the house, but I don't think I ever actually saw anything specific.
So nothing happened at that house then?
No, nothing. We moved back to Sumner into the apartment at Salmon Creek when I was in third grade. Yeah, I had to in third grade because it was right after Hank and Mom split up. And I was over at my aunt's house one night, staying the night over there because we were playing video games. She had a Nintendo and all that. And woke up in the middle of the night hearing glass breaking. Look out in the kitchen, and there's dishes flying all over the place, smashing into the walls, the whole 9 yards. We all run for the front door, and there's glasses and plates and silverware and everything else flying at us. We're dodging it as we're headed for the front door. We get out the door, and we hear something shatter against the door as we pull it closed behind us. And then everything went absolutely silent. We crack the door open and look back inside, and there's absolutely no mess.
Wow.
We never did figure out what had happened exactly. I mean, there's no way that 5 people would have the same hallucination, but that's one idea that had been suggested.
And you continued to have experiences, even the black-eyed children you saw again, correct?
I've seen them 5 or 6 times throughout my life.
Wow.
Yeah, including one here in East Texas.
But there were things that happened before you saw them again, including this poltergeist activity that kind of was erased and everyone in the house saw it.
Yeah, all of us saw it, and when we opened the door, we expected to find a huge mess, and there was nothing. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be.
Do you believe that a person is a catalyst? Like, these activities might be happening around us constantly, but it requires a catalyst for people to see it. Do you believe that you may be the catalyst in this situation? In other words, you're the conduit for this stuff, even though this stuff is probably happening everywhere, multi-dimensions. We'll get into like what you think it is or what you feel that you know it is. But do you think that you may have been the catalyst for people seeing these things?
I actually have wondered that myself on several occasions, and I think as I learned and grew, I kind of faded away from that, for lack of a better way to put it. Not so much being the catalyst, but I can still feel it going on around me. Even if there's not anything for anybody else to see, I can still feel the energies around me.
So after the poltergeist type incident that was experienced by your family, what happened next?
Oh, let's see. I think I was about 12 or so. I'm not 100% sure. We moved to Aberdeen and we're living in the big blue house. And I heard something scratching around inside the crawl space in my bedroom. And when I opened it up to see what was going on, what was scratching in there, against my mom's orders, of course, she assumed it was a rat or something. I opened it up and I could see like handprints, like somebody had been kneeling down and had their hands flat on the floor in the dust. And they were adult-sized hands. But there was nobody in the crawl space anywhere that I could find. Just those 2 handprints. In that same house, my mom fell down the stairs. And she said that she felt something underneath her as right before the first impact, like a cushion of air underneath her.
So it wasn't something that pushed her, it was something that was helping
trying to catch her.
Right. Wow. Did you ever have, during that time, did you have elaborate nightmares or elaborate dreams?
I've had elaborate dreams and nightmares most of my life.
And is it associative to a lot of the things you've experienced? I mean, I'm sure you had nightmares that first time you were dragged across the room. Did you even go back to the bedroom the next night?
I did.
Okay.
But only because my stepdad was a real jerk about it.
Were you able to keep the light on that
Yeah, I
night?
kept the light on, and I kept the bathroom for the house. You had to go through my room to get to it. So I kept the bathroom light on and my bedroom light on all night, regardless of how much he complained about the power bill.
Even though there's years in between, you're having experiences, you're seeing things in places, you're very perceptive, sensitive to these energies, and you eventually experience the black-eyed children again.
Yeah, I've seen them a few times. I think the next time I actually saw them, I was in Rawlins. Yeah, I was in Rawlins the first time I saw them. They were walking across a park, and our paths like literally intersected. And it was just, I got this really cold chill down my back, and I turned and looked at them, and they were both completely black-eyed staring at me. It really wigged me out because they stopped. They literally stopped and stared at me.
What do you think they are? I mean, we'll get further into it because I want to hear more stories about your encounters with them. But what were you thinking at that time? What they were at that time? Not now, but then. What? This is the second time you've seen these things. What are they?
I thought they might have been some kind of like a warning sign of something to come. Was kind of the feeling I got, but nothing really ever followed the encounters that would warrant something like that. At least not to me personally.
Did anything major happen in the world after the first or second encounter with these kids?
Come to think of it, the first encounter may well have been around the was it the Columbia explosion, the space shuttle that blew up.
Right.
It might have been right around that time. I'm not 100% sure, but it may well have been. I know I saw them also about a week before 9/11.
And I know I've read some stories traditionally, people have seen them the way you have also. They've knocked on people's doors. Were you ever in a situation where you were home alone or home with family or your wife or girlfriend or whoever, and they knocked on the door?
Not exactly, but I was out camping with my girlfriend one time and they scratched on the tent door.
And so you're there, you're in a tent, and it was definitely a person that scratched on the tent door. Did you unzip it? Did you look out and see them?
I unzipped it enough to be able to see outside. And my girlfriend at the time looked out the same hole that I did. And she said, "Oh, they're just little kids. Let them come in. They're probably cold." I'm going, no. Did you not look at their faces? She said, "They're just kids. How harmful can they be?" I said, we're not inviting them in this tent, period. If they're cold, they can sit out there by the campfire.
And was it a campground where there were, other people in the area at that time?
Well, yeah, but the campsites were spaced out far enough that you had relative privacy as well.
Sure, it's just that's what would make sense, that you assume, or at least your girlfriend at the time was assuming, hey, these are kids maybe from a neighboring camp.
Right.
And so they're scratching on the tent. You know exactly what they are because you've seen them before. Did you explain to your girlfriend at the time what these things are?
I pointed out to her that I've seen them before and they usually make me quite uncomfortable. And I pointed out that she needed to look at their faces and she'd see what I was talking about. Their eyes were completely black. Once she realized that, she went into full-on panic mode. And it took everything I had to just keep her in the tent.
Wow. And did they return that night?
Not that I'm aware of, but there were noises around the tent all night. That could have been animals or anything.
What were you hearing around the tent?
Like footsteps and crunching leaves and that kind of thing. It could have been anything. It could have been somebody walking around the tent. It could have been them hanging around. It could have been animals. It could have been anything. But once we actually tried to go to sleep, I didn't look outside again.
Are there any reports of the kids hurting anyone, causing a problem? I mean, there's, obviously these stories are really scary, and there are people that swear by them, including yourself. But were there any horrible consequences? Did the kids ever make it inside someone's house? Was someone found dead after a report?
I've heard stories of such, but I've never seen any confirmation of it. I imagine, though, that the way the world is, that if there were confirmation of it, that probably wouldn't be made public.
And I want to get a little bit into, if there are people in the leaders of the world that are aware of this type of activity. But let's get back to your timeline. So you see these things again. Were there a lot of things that happened in between the sightings of the kids, other encounters like the poltergeist encounter with your family? What are some of the
Nothing super significant, but I heard sounds and occasionally thought I saw apparitions and whatnot, but only fleeting moments,
Right. So when was the next really, and these are all profound, but when was the next thing that really...
It was when I was living in Rawlins right after I saw them.
Okay, and what happened?
I was living in this little apartment about 1.5 miles from my mom's house. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know why I woke up, but I couldn't get back to sleep, so I went out in the living room to go watch TV. I'm sitting there watching TV, and this black mist starts creeping out of the other bedroom. I'm like, what is that? I got this feeling I just needed to get out of there right now, I got out of there, and I reached back through the front door to grab something. I think it was my keys or something. And the mist touched my hand, and it was like touching death. It was that cold and that empty. And I ran faster than I've ever run in my life to my mom's house. About 1.5 miles, and I got there in like 5 minutes. The touch of it scared me badly. I mean, seeing it kind of creeped me out a little bit, but the way it felt when I touched it was something else. I have no idea what it was, but I suspected that it was some kind of negative energy at the very least.
And all of these things that you're experiencing, do you feel they can see you as much as you can see them?
Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. It really depends on whatever it is I'm encountering, I guess. Sometimes it's like it's playing on a loop, kind of like that car. And other times it's like it's intelligent. I mean, just a couple of years ago here in this house that I'm living in now, I had a rather bizarre, intelligent, haunting encounter.
And what happened?
I was walking down my hallway, coming from the living room to the bedroom. And I look up, and all of a sudden, there's this old woman standing right in front of me. Stood there and talked with her for about 10 minutes. She thought it was 1972. Was looking for her daughter. And I literally blinked at one point, and she just disappeared. She was gone.
And what do you think that was? Was it a lost soul? Was it a blip in a time frame? What do you really think that was?
My first thought was a lost soul. But I've also had the thought occur to me of, well, what if it was an alternate timeline or a parallel dimension kind of thing? I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if either of those were true. I've seen enough over my life that I firmly believe that this isn't the only dimension where life exists.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
There are those who say that this quiet town holds many secrets. Legend has it that beneath this very tower, a dark force had its eyes set on the children.
We were told that what was going on there was for the benefit of humanity.
What would you say to the people who say, well, all these children were kidnapped and murdered and you were a part of it? What would you tell them?
I did approve of it, but there was nothing I could do about it.
They wanted a large number of programmed boys to be used for mind control operations.
And there are others who say it's still happening to this day.
I don't know, I for myself find it a little suspicious that all the evidence has been conveniently destroyed.
Let's put it this way. If you're sitting there with 20 guns pointed at you, what are you going to do? Whatever the hell they want!
Watch Montauk Chronicles now for free on Tubi, Plex, Roku, and available for download on Amazon and Apple TV.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
What I'm really curious of is that obviously there are certain times of the day or night and certain times of the year that traditionally it's said that people are more susceptible to seeing these things, and Halloween being one of them. Do you believe that? Is Halloween a more supernaturally charged time?
I would have to say so, yeah. I think that the easiest way to put it is that's when the veil is the thinnest. The worlds are easily crossed between to a degree because of that. No, one year on Halloween, I was out with two of my friends, Stephanie and Michelle. We were out trick-or-treating. We decided we were going to cut through the graveyard just because it was quicker. Going around it was like 2 miles, and cutting through it was like a half mile, so it was a whole lot easier to go through. As we were going through, we found 3 fresh graves with each of our names on them. My friend Stephanie, last I talked to her, she still had the Polaroid picture she took that night of the graves. We put stones around the graves. As soon as we saw them, we piled a bunch of stones around them to mark where they were, specifically so we could come back and get a better look in the daylight. When we got back the next day, the ground was completely undisturbed. The grass hadn't been disturbed at all. There were no headstones, nothing. But she still had the Polaroid picture that she took. And it freaked us all out a little bit seeing our own graves. Each of us had a different death year on it. And it was weird.
And so the images that you saw with your names on the graves remained on the Polaroid, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, what happened to that Polaroid? Do you still have
As
access?
far as I know, she still has it.
Okay, wow. Now, it sounds like a very similar shared apparition or premonition or experience like it was in the kitchen with the poltergeist that seemed to disappear.
Honestly, I specifically got the feeling that there was some kind of entity around that was trying to scare us. There were stories in town of a witch that lived under the stairs in the graveyard. But I went and checked that out myself, and there was literally no space under those stairs. You couldn't even get a squirrel in there.
Were there, like the witch story, were there local legends like that you felt had some truth and weight to it?
Oh, yeah, there were several in that area that definitely stood out to me. Wyoming Frontier Prison was one of them. My buddy Kenny and I actually got permission from the curator over the summer one year to stay the night in there, and we saw some pretty weird stuff. I mean, we got up to the third floor where nobody was supposed to go without permission because it was condemned and the floor was all weak and everything. But we went up there and we specifically heard a dripping noise. We chalked up to, well, it's a leaky roof, no big deal. Until we found the puddle in the middle of the floor and scanned straight up from with our flashlights, and there was a woman hanging there in a dress that had clearly been white but was now red, and the blood was dripping off of her toes onto the floor. There were stories that the woman in the red dress was originally an attorney that had gone in to see one of her clients, and the prisoners got a hold of her and did all sorts of vile, nasty things to her, and she didn't survive it.
And the image that you saw may have been her ghost apparition.
Strung up from the rafters, yeah. We both froze sitting right there, staring right at her. And it couldn't have been more than 2 a.m. when we first saw her. And we both stood there completely frozen until morning when sunlight started shining in through the windows.
For the people that have never experienced something like that, can you explain a little bit and take me through what the body does, what the mind does, how you feel when you see something like that, how it's different than seeing a scene in a horror movie?
Well, the first thing I can think of is the whole body kind of tenses up. It's like the muscles almost turn to rock. They just won't work. They won't move. The mind typically starts racing, trying to make sense of what you're seeing. And sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. And I think the ones that it really can't make sense of are the ones that stick with people. I mean, they've made several movies based on true stories that I've seen, and I'm sitting here going, yeah, I've seen similar things to that. That's not a big surprise. I remember specifically there was a house we lived in. It was in Rollins as well. It was a little red house, and down in the basement there was it was like a little storage closet that was actually under the stairs. But anytime anybody went in there, they got the chills and they really got creeped out to the point that they would not go in there, period. And this happened with a number of people that didn't even believe in ghosts or anything like that in this house. Come to find out, shortly before the penitentiary had been closed down, a man had escaped from the penitentiary and took refuge in that basement where he murdered a 17-year-old girl in that very room. Her name was Natasha. I don't know a last name, but I specifically remember it because my bedroom was in the room that was attached to that closet. And I was laying in bed one night and I look over toward the door that leads up to the stairs, and she literally stepped through the door next to the door. The door that went into the storage cabinet. She literally stepped out through the door. And we sat and talked for quite some time. That's how I found out everything. And then I went and researched it specifically with the information she had said and found out that it was all true.
Were you scared when you were talking to this apparition? So you had a conversation with Natasha.
Right.
What did she look like when you were talking to her?
Really, really, really pale. Her hair was kind of stringy. Looked like it hadn't been washed in quite some time, you know. She was a really pretty girl. Kind of, in a way, reminded me a little bit of Snow White, thinking about it. The whole alabaster skin, dark hair, ruby lips. And her clothes were all torn up.
By that time, you had experienced a variety of bizarre encounters. So would you say you were prepared to have this conversation? It
I
wasn't.
would say so, yeah. By that point, I was already well into actually going out and investigating paranormal activity as opposed to it just finding me.
Can you tell me about some of your investigations? And because you were doing it as a kid, and
Oh,
then
yeah, yeah.
So you made a decision. Can you tell me about some of them?
Well, we investigated the Wyoming Frontier Prison several times. Once we actually got we didn't officially get it running as a business or anything like that, but we had a group of us that would go out and investigate stuff. And one of our primary investigations that we did was the Wyoming Frontier Prison. We spent several nights in that place. One year on Halloween, we were in there, and the curator locked us up in one of the cell blocks, not actual cells, but in the cell block. And we heard something being dragged across the floor toward the back of the cell, or back of the cell block. We go to check it out, and we can see drag marks on the floor, wet. Didn't look like it was blood or anything. My guess was water. But we saw the drag marks on the floor, and they went straight into the sectional wall. Not like they got drug up to the wall and turned. It went straight into the wall, and the drag marks were cut off by the wall. Made me think of those movies where there's a secret passage in the wall, you know?
Right.
But if there was one, we never did figure out how to open it. I kind of doubt there was, considering it was inside a prison.
So you've had encounters, all kinds. You've seen apparitions. You've had poltergeist encounters. You were assaulted by something, some kind of entity. And those stories have been out there too. Like I said, the most striking to me was the Doris Spither case, where a lot of people believe she was raped by whatever this was. What do you think all of this stuff is? It's different things. What do you think an apparition is that can actually grab you and move you from one place to another?
I think most likely it would be probably an angry spirit that has been around for quite some time, and their anger has fed into their ability to affect the physical world. Be it because they felt that they died wrongly, or their resting place was disturbed, or just they had something left unfinished. Over time, I would imagine that could really twist even a human's perspective on things. Being stuck in a reality where you can't interact with anything, you can't talk to anybody, you can, I imagine, see what's going on, but you can't interact at all in any way, shape, or form. I imagine that would drive even a human soul insane.
So do you think that Doris Spither was raped by a ghost of a human, or could it have been something else?
I honestly think that particular case was an inhuman entity, more than likely some kind of a demon.
And what is it? What is a demon? Essentially, we call it that, but what exactly is it? Is it traditionally of hell, or is it something? And again, I know we don't have the answers, but whatever your truth is, what works for your answer?
I believe that the term demon itself actually breaks down to dimension traveler. That's to say that not necessarily of hell, but possibly a hell-like dimension. I mean, there's been evidence found of things that aren't quite human at archaeological sites and whatnot. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if there were arts that were lost to the ages where people could summon these things. I mean, it would be really, really scary if those rituals and whatever else is involved were to resurface and fall into the wrong hands. Because, I mean, how do you stop something that's basically energy?
I mean, like I had said earlier, I think that science is starting to acknowledge these possibilities, at least through the philosophy and idea that we are living in multiple realities. Now, if we're living in multiple realities, then there are different versions of a lot of things in each of those realities, and perhaps there are what we may have perceived as demons or even aliens. Or do you think that the alien encounters, UFO encounters, black-eyed children are all kind of coming from the same place, perhaps not the same dimension, but in the same method?
I wouldn't think so necessarily. I would think that the aliens were native to this dimension, just not anything we've encountered before. I mean, as far as the universe goes, humans are still in their infancy.
Right, even though we don't want to admit it.
Right. It's just pure arrogance to think that we're the only intelligent life there is. I've seen a few unidentified flying objects, but really hard to have any kind of proof or reference point as to figure out exactly what it is.
Can you take me to one of those nights where you saw one?
Oddly enough, again, it was in Rawlins. We were sitting in the apartment and the power went out. It started getting real hot in the apartment because there was no air conditioning. So we all decided just to go outside and hang out till the power came back on. We were laying on the hood of my mom's car and we look up and we see this light. And it goes like straight up. It was straight up from us. And it did this weird pattern, like zigzagging all over the place. And then it zipped off and the lights came back on just a few seconds after it zipped off. It really confused me, specifically because, well, the power had gone out, and if the lights had been on, it was dim enough that we probably wouldn't have seen it in the first place. And then as soon as it disappears, the lights come back on. It really made me wonder, you know?
Sure, and I think some encounters throughout, recorded history of that type of thing, similar things have happened. People have lost power in their cars, in their house.
Well, they've made movies about it specifically where they'll lose power in their car or whatever, and they'll lose several hours of time, too.
Sure. So that's in line with other people's experiences, which is interesting because that means, a lot of people, even though it wasn't on the same date and same year, they've had shared experiences. So whatever these things are, they're using the same tech and it has the same effect on our technology.
Right. And I think that I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to learn that our planet is under observation by some kind of other intelligent life out there that is far beyond our intelligence. I mean, that's just, like I said, it would be completely arrogant to think that we're the only intelligent life in the universe.
And in your lifetime, it's as if you didn't ever have a chance to doubt this stuff, because you were very young when you were pulled across your bedroom. What was the pinnacle of everything you've experienced? If I were to ask you what was the most profound experience you ever had so far, because you still have them, what particularly was it?
Probably the night in the basement in Rawlins in the castle. Me and my sister and my friend Kenny and a friend of my sister's were all there. And there were these handprints painted on the wall in the basement that we just thought were essentially graffiti from the previous tenants or whatever. All of us got the random idea, which I think was actually whispered to us, and none of us realized it at the time, to link arms and put one hand on each of these handprints. When we did, we heard somebody talking to us asking for help. And I remember focusing in as hard as I could specifically on that voice. And then the next thing I know, all of us are waking up laying on the floor. The voice never repeated again after that. We even tried to duplicate it by linking arms and putting our hands on the handprints again. No result whatsoever. There was a lot of activity in that house specifically that after that, I can't really say it stopped, but it kind of plateaued. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to find doors opening on their own or closing on their own or water taps coming on. In that same house, now that I think about it, there was also a panel mirror at the top of the stairs up onto the top floor. And when we moved in, there was a replica Roman short sword and a morning star hanging on either side of the mirror. If you stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked up into the mirror, it reflected back into it was like a slatted window into the upstairs bathroom. When you looked up there from the bottom of the stairs, you could see a dude wearing a black hat and like a Western style coat, but you couldn't see his face or anything. He was just standing there inside that window, slatted window at the top of the stairs. When I took them down from either side of that mirror, we never saw him again. When we left that house, I specifically had the feeling of it's not safe to leave these replica weapons here for fear that somebody will hang them back up there and possibly release whatever that thing is. So I took them with me, and I still to this day have that Roman short sword with me. I destroyed the Morning Star on purpose. Specifically so that if somehow it does get out of my hands, that they don't have both pieces.
So you believe that objects can retain an energy or a soul even, or maybe it's a gateway or itself, the object itself is a catalyst to release these things.
I think of it more as a key, but yeah.
And I think maybe that does explain some hauntings, even the Amityville haunting. They kept all the bed frames where the family was murdered before them, the Lutzes. And
I bet that contributed to it in a huge way. I didn't know that they kept the bed frames.
Yeah, George Lutz kept the bed frames. I mean, obviously the mattresses got rid of, but he wanted everything at a short price and felt, hey, I have beds for everybody. And no big deal. And I think that's why they had the activity that they did. I do believe that house was haunted, at least for them.
There's not a whole lot of places that have a reputation for being haunted that I wouldn't go into, but that's one of them.
Yeah, I grew up near it, and to this day, it's still, I get a bad feeling about it.
I don't think I could even set foot on the property without having issues over it.
Well, because you're obviously I'm sensitive to things. I've had experiences, but you're like a dynamo. That's why you've seen these things throughout your life. Do you believe that there's different levels of sensitivity, and you have a big
I kind of have to believe that because I am sensitive to things that nobody else I have heard of has seen, which suggests to me that, not to sound conceited, but I'm on a higher level of sensitivity than the average person.
I agree, especially seeing the apparitions that you've seen, and then people with you have seen them, and I think people haven't really seen them when they're not in your presence. So that's when you've had the collective, and that happened in the entity case with Doris Speither, because all of the paranormal investigators, including Barry Taff from UCLA, saw the apparition, and they collectively saw it, but only because she was there in the center of the room. They hadn't seen, Barry had seen because he continues to investigate, but I'm sure a lot of those people didn't see, after that incident.
That really makes me wonder if people like myself couldn't be an extra tool for paranormal investigations. I explain why I usually find some kind of evidence when I go out to investigate a place.
Just going to the Black-Eyed Children, back to them for a second. Was there another encounter after the last time that you told me you encountered them?
Well, I've seen them here in East Texas once when Four Winds was still open. I was out in the woods trying to help set up for something that was going on out there. I can't remember what it was. It might have even been the haunted woods for Halloween I was trying to help set up. But I was out there in the woods, and I heard a rustling, and I turned around, and there was a black-eyed girl standing there. Usually, that's the only time I've ever seen one of them. Usually it's a pair. There's a boy and a girl. but it was only the girl that time out in the woods, which made me kind of question what the hell was going on, you know? Because, like I said, I usually see them in pairs. Just one of them kind of made me wonder if something happened to the other one.
And you saw this one. Did it say anything to you? Did it?
It didn't say anything, but it was crying.
And a lot of people have seen them. Well, I mean, not an enormous amount, but people have seen them in that area of Texas, correct?
I think so, yeah. I think the original documented case was in either Dallas or Houston. I can't remember for sure. But it was somewhere here in Texas. Dated in the late 90s.
What if you're sitting home alone one night and you get a knock on the door and you open it and you see them standing there? Did you ever consider doing the thing that most people don't and let them in?
I would consider it if not for the safety of my daughter and my wife. I'm pretty sure I could handle myself, but inviting them in would give them, in my opinion, would give them a permanent in. And who's to say that they wouldn't, that something wouldn't happen because they had that in? I would err on the side of caution to make sure that my family stayed safe.
Now, I'm sure you're curious after your encounters and speaking with different apparitions, seeing them. If anyone's curious about letting them in your house, I'm sure it would be you.
Oh, very. If the opportunity presented itself and I was out in the woods in a tent by myself, or they approached a car I was in by myself, I would strongly consider it. Just not my home, where it could put my family at risk.
And I may have asked this earlier, but I'll ask in this thread. What do you think happens when a person would let them into their home? What could you assume might happen?
Well, according to the stories, they usually end up dead. But I've never found any confirmation of that anywhere, so I'm not sure. But they do definitely put off an air of needing to take caution, so I wouldn't think that would be outside the realm of possibility. Especially if it turns out that they are some kind of a demon. Demons seem to, at the very least, feed on human emotions, if not sacrifices.
You know, if we go to fiction for a second, I know that in the story It, the book written by Stephen King, it's one of the best horror stories ever written. And I'm talking about the book. Yeah, the book just kills those movies. But Pennywise is an alien in the book, crashes during prehistoric times, but an entity nonetheless, and understands how to shapeshift, preys off of fears. And it seems to me these apparitions of black-eyed children are perhaps an entity's idea of what might scare us, because it seems so traditionally out of a horror movie that it's almost as if, just like Pennywise would read the minds and fears of these children and said, well, what would be great to scare these kids? Oh, all the horror movies they're watching, And it's so strange that, to me, that we all walk this line between fiction and reality. People are telling me stories every week that are right out of, the Twilight Zone or horror films that I've seen. But I believe, at the very least, each of these people, including yourself, had experienced something, because I have a story to lend that's right out of a horror movie. So obviously something is happening in this world that is very close to the fiction that we absorb. And it's hard to separate if you open your mind to it. How do you feel about existence? All of these things that actually exist, that are not entirely fiction, but are, synonymous with the fiction that we love.
I think that part of it boils down to humans have encountered these things over time, specifically. And in a way, a lot of it has become legend, for lack of a better way to put it. And with people not being able to confirm these things and quantify them and catalog them scientifically and all that, I think that's where it comes from to lend it to fiction. But at the same time, I think that a lot of these fiction movies out there, and fiction shows for that matter, could be on the right track for what the truth actually is. But they're set up in such a fashion that it's there for entertainment purposes, and nobody gives it a second thought because of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how the world will change if some of these things were confirmed through, let's say, quantum sciences, right? And they're saying, no, these creatures and different things exist because, fill in the blank, we don't know yet. And they are in other dimensions and other realities. And sometimes those realities cross with our own. And that's why people see these things. And then our perception of fiction will change because it's like, well, this isn't entirely fiction. It's not fictitious. It's real. That, to me, that's fascinating, where fiction merges with reality.
The line is quite blurry sometimes, especially in certain circumstances. For
sure. So I'll come to our last question here, and I ask everybody, and it's been great, Dex, on this first interview, and I know it's a follow-up to the one we did for my show, but this is focusing on your life, and I think it lends to more chapters. So, how do you feel about it? I've asked you how you felt about existence, and now it's important that I ask you, when you do leave this physical life, what would you take with you? And there's no right or wrong answer.
The memories and the joy that I've accumulated over my life, and the pride I take in having been able to help as many people as I have in figuring out some of their paranormal difficulties. I mean, I may not be the most savvy as far as person-to-person communications go, but I have been able to help a few people with my talents and my sensitivities. And I take a lot of pride in the fact that I can use it to be able to help somebody.
Welcome back to After the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garetano, and I want to thank you for joining the conversation tonight. If you've had an experience similar to Dex Skarsvog, I want to know. Let's talk about it, as my eternal fascination is that of the borderline between fiction and reality. Here's a quote from one of my favorite childhood TV shows, Tales from the Dark Side. I often love reciting the final line on every Off to the Witch show. However apropos to tonight's episode, here it goes in full. The dark side is always there, waiting for us to enter, waiting to enter us. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight.